I never told my son about my $50,000 monthly salary. He saw me in old clothes and thought I was a poor cleaning lady. But when his bride said at the wedding, "Don't come to the table, you're embarrassing us," I calmly stood up. "Fine, then I'll cancel the payment for this $80,000 banquet." His face. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Holloway, and I was 63 years old when my own son looked at me the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth, with quiet embarrassment and a desperate wish that it would simply disappear. I want to tell you this story not because it left me bitter. It didn't. I want to tell it because I think there are other women out there. Women who sacrificed everything, who built something real with their own hands, who loved without keeping score, and who were repaid with contempt. If that is you, then this story is yours as much as it is mine. I grew up in rural Ohio, the daughter of a farmer and a schoolteacher. Nobody handed me anything. I put myself through college, working nights at a diner, married at 24, had Daniel at 26, and buried my husband Richard at 41. Richard left behind a modest insurance policy and a house with a leaking roof. What he also left behind, without knowing it, was my absolute determination never to be helpless again. Over the next 2 decades, I built a small but tenacious cleaning and facilities management company. I started with one industrial contract, a medical office park in Columbus, and I expanded methodically, reinvesting every dollar, hiring carefully, never borrowing more than I could repay in 18 months. By the time Daniel was finishing graduate school, Holloway Facilities Solutions had 31 employees, contracts with 4 hospital systems, and a net monthly revenue that most people would not believe if I told them. $50,000 a month was not my salary in any formal sense. It was closer to what I allowed myself to draw as personal income, after payroll, after taxes, after reinvestment. The rest stayed in the business or moved into a carefully managed portfolio that my accountant, a dry and brilliant woman named Carol Estbridge, oversaw with something close to religious devotion. I did not tell Daniel any of this. That is the part people always find hardest to understand, so let me explain it carefully. I did not hide my success out of shame or paranoia. I hid it, or rather I simply did not advertise it, because I had watched money do ugly things to people I loved. I had a cousin who came into an inheritance at 30 and spent the next 15 years in a fog of entitlement and half-finished projects. I had a friend whose children stopped calling the moment her savings account ran dry. I wanted Daniel to build his own life on his own terms. I wanted him to love me because I was his mother, not because I was a resource. So when Daniel visited, he saw what I wanted him to see. A tidy but modest ranch house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, a 10-year-old Honda Civic, a woman in jeans and a fleece jacket who made excellent pot roast and complained about her bad knee. He knew I ran a small cleaning business. He assumed I was comfortable, not struggling, but certainly not wealthy. I never corrected him. I cooked dinner. I asked about his work. I folded his laundry when he left it on my couch. He was a good boy for most of his life. Curious, warm, a little impractical. He had Richard's dreamy quality, which I loved even when it frustrated me. He became an environmental consultant, which suited him. He had good friends. He called me every Sunday. And then he met Vanessa. I want to be fair. First impressions are not verdicts. When Daniel brought Vanessa to my house for Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I told myself she was simply nervous. She was 31, dark-haired, polished in the way that suggests considerable effort and considerable awareness of that effort. She spoke in a clipped, evaluating way that reminded me of a real estate agent walking through a property, taking measurements, noting deficiencies. She looked at my kitchen and said, "How charming," in a tone that meant the opposite. She declined the pot roast. She spent most of the evening on her phone. I said nothing. I passed the cranberry sauce. Over the following year, the signals accumulated. Small things, each one dismissible on its own. Vanessa referred to Daniel's childhood photographs as a lot. She suggested twice that Daniel consider whether his obligations to me might be affecting his professional ambitions. Once, on a phone call I was not supposed to overhear, I heard her tell her sister that Daniel's mother was basically a cleaning lady. Sweet, but not exactly someone you bring to the partner's dinner. I was standing in my own hallway when I heard that. I did not move for a moment. Then I went back to the kitchen and finished washing the dishes. The engagement was announced 8 months before the wedding. Daniel called me on a Sunday, voice bright with happiness, and I was genuinely glad for him. Glad for the happiness in his voice, the lightness of it. I told him I loved him. I told him I would be there. What I did not tell him was that I had already been thinking, quietly and carefully, about what kind of woman his future wife was. The wedding was held at the Ashford Estate, a venue outside Columbus that specialized in the kind of event where everything costs twice what it should, and the coordinator uses the word curated, without irony. It was a Saturday in late September, the weather cool and golden. I wore my good navy dress, the one I had bought for Carol's retirement dinner 2 years earlier. Sensible heels, my pearl earrings, which had been Richard's mother's. I was not seated at the family table. I discovered this quietly from the seating chart near the entrance. I was placed at a side table near the bar, with Daniel's college roommate's parents and an elderly great-uncle of Vanessa's, who was hard of hearing. I stood there looking at the chart for a moment, then found my seat without saying anything to anyone. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried a little. I let myself feel that. The good part of it. The real part. The reception was where it happened. I had stood up to make my way toward the head table, intending to embrace my son and offer a quiet word of congratulations before the formal toasts began. I was perhaps 10 feet away when Vanessa stepped smoothly to her left and placed herself between me and the table. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to be deniable, cold enough to be unmistakable. "Margaret," she said, in a voice just low enough that only I could hear. "Please don't approach the table right now. You're a bit out of place here, and it's creating a visual." She glanced at my dress. "You understand." I looked at her for a long moment. Around us, the room hummed with conversation and the soft clink of crystal. Daniel was laughing at something his best man had said. He hadn't seen. "You understand?" she said again. I understood perfectly. The question was what I intended to do about it. I took one step back. I kept my voice very quiet and very even. "All right," I said. "Then I'll sit down. And perhaps I should also call the venue coordinator to discuss the payment arrangement for this evening." Her smile flickered. Just for a second. But I saw it. I turned and walked back to my table by the bar, sat down next to the great-uncle who couldn't hear, and accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter. My hands were completely steady. My heart was not. But I had learned over 63 years that the hands are what other people see. I did not sleep well that night. I had driven myself home from the Ashford estate at 10:30, changed out of the navy dress, made a cup of chamomile tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time in the dark, not crying. I am not a woman who cries easily, and I was not sure in those hours what I would have been crying about. The insult itself, or the larger, more frightening question that the insult had forced open. Where had Daniel been? That was what I kept returning to. Vanessa's behavior was cruel, but it was, in a way, legible. She had assessed me, found me lacking, and acted accordingly. She was consistent, at least, with everything I had observed over the previous year. I did not expect decency from her. But Daniel had been 10 feet away. He had been laughing with his best man. He had not looked over once. Was he complicit? Or was he simply oblivious? I turned that question over for most of the night, the way you work a stone smooth between your fingers. By the time pale October light started coming through the kitchen window, I had arrived at an answer that was not comfortable, but felt true. It did not matter which. Whether Daniel had actively chosen not to see or had been maneuvered so carefully that he genuinely hadn't, the result was the same. I had been erased from my own son's wedding reception by a woman who believed I was powerless, and my son had let it happen. That was a grief I would have to sit with later. For now, there was something more pressing. I poured the cold tea down the drain and made coffee instead. Here is what I knew, factually. I had paid for the wedding banquet. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not Vanessa's parents, who had contributed a modest sum toward flowers and the string quartet. Me. When Daniel had confided, 3 months before the wedding, that the venue deposit alone was $30,000, and that he was not sure how to manage it, I had said, quietly, that I would handle it. I had called the Ashford estate the following Monday and arranged payment directly. $80,000, covering the full reception package, catering for 212 guests, the bar service, the lighting design, and the coordination fee. I had written a check from my business account, because that was simpler for tax purposes, and the venue had my name and contact information on file as the paying party. Vanessa knew I had paid. Daniel had told her. I knew this because he had mentioned it in a phone call, saying Vanessa wanted to send me a thank you card. The card had never arrived. I had noted that, filed it away, and said nothing. So here was the arithmetic. Vanessa had accepted $80,000 of my money, seated me next to a deaf great-uncle, and told me I was creating a visual. I was 63 years old. I had built a company from nothing. I had raised a child alone for 17 years, and I was being managed. I thought about Richard then, about how he would have reacted. With hot, immediate anger, probably, the kind that burns bright and leaves nothing useful behind. I had always been the cooler of the two of us, the one who waited, the one who planned. I picked up a yellow legal pad from my home office. I still work in paper for certain things. There is something clarifying about it, and I began to write. Not a letter, not a list of grievances, a map of assets and leverage. The Ashford estate payment, $80,000, paid in full in my name with a signed contract that listed cancellation and modification terms. I had a copy in my files. I always keep copies. The contract had a clause I remembered clearly. Any cancellation or substantial modification made more than 30 days prior to the event would result in a partial refund. Within 30 days, the full amount was non-refundable. The wedding had already occurred. But there was a second clause, one pertaining to post-event billing adjustments for guest overages, and more relevantly, to a supplementary outdoor terrace extension that had been added 4 weeks before the date. That extension had not yet been fully invoiced. I had the original estimate but had not yet received the final bill, which meant the venue coordinator still owed me a conversation. That was one thread. The second thread was Daniel himself. He did not know the full scope of my finances. That had always been a deliberate choice, but it now had operational relevance. He did not know, for instance, that I had been quietly updating my will and estate documents over the past several years with an attorney named Philip Garrett. He did not know the current value of my portfolio. or the structure of the business succession plan, or the existence of a trust I had established for charitable purposes that could, at my direction, absorb a significant portion of what Daniel might otherwise expect to inherit. I was not thinking about punishment. I want to be clear about that. I was thinking about visibility. The problem was not that Vanessa disrespected me. The problem was that she disrespected me because she believed it was safe to do so. Because she had looked at a woman in a navy dress and sensible heels and concluded there were no consequences attached to that woman. She had made a calculation based on incomplete information. My plan, in its earliest form, was simple. Correct the information. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with confrontation, with a series of precise, legal, documented actions that would make the reality of my position impossible to ignore. The first step was a phone call to Philip Garrett. I made it the following Monday morning from my office at Holloway Facilities Solutions. A proper office, with a glass door and a view of the parking lot and a desk. I had chosen myself from a furniture catalog 15 years ago, and that still suited me fine. I told Philip I wanted to review my estate documents. He said he could see me Wednesday. The second step was a call to Carol Esbridge. Carol picked up on the second ring, which she always did, as if she had been waiting. I told her I wanted a full current summary of my liquid and near-liquid assets, formatted clearly. She asked if everything was all right. I told her everything was fine. I was simply being thorough. Carol, who had been my accountant for 19 years and had the professional discretion of a Swiss banker, said she would have it ready by Tuesday. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the parking lot. Somewhere across Columbus, my son was beginning his married life in an apartment Vanessa had chosen and furnished, and that I had never been invited to see. He would call on Sunday, probably. He would use his warm, slightly vague voice. He would ask if I was doing all right. I would say I was fine, and I would be telling the truth, because I had a legal pad, a phone, and 19 years of careful preparation, and I was only just beginning. Philip Garrett's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled of carpet cleaner and good coffee. He was 68, silver-haired, and had the particular quality of a man who had heard a great many human complications without ever losing his composure. I had chosen him for that quality 20 years ago, and he had never disappointed me. I sat across from his desk on Wednesday morning and told him what had happened at the wedding. Not the emotional version, the factual version, the seating arrangement, the comment near the head table, the $80,000 payment on file with the venue. My current estate documents, which named Daniel as primary heir to an estate worth, by Carol's Tuesday summary, approximately $4.3 million in combined assets. Philip listened without interrupting. Then he removed his reading glasses, polished them once with his tie, and said, "What do you want to accomplish?" I told him I wanted 3 things. First, to review and potentially restructure my will and trust documents to give me maximum flexibility going forward. Second, to understand my legal standing with regard to the Ashford estate payment. Specifically, whether I had any legitimate grounds to request documentation or modification of any outstanding invoices in my own name. Third, to ensure that any future financial assistance I might provide to Daniel and Vanessa, and I was not saying I would be structured in a way that preserved my rights and made the nature of the relationship clear. Philip nodded slowly. Restructuring the estate documents is straightforward, he said. You have complete discretion over your own estate. We can add conditions, establish additional trusts, adjust percentages. None of that requires Daniel's knowledge or consent. He paused. The venue question is more interesting. If the final invoice hasn't been issued, you're still technically in an active billing relationship with them. You have every right to request an itemized statement. That's what I thought, I said. I called the Ashford estate that afternoon from my car in Philip's parking garage. The coordinator, a brisk woman named Sandra, remembered me immediately. I asked for an itemized final accounting of all charges against my contract, including the terrace extension. Sandra said she would email it within 48 hours. Carol's summary, meanwhile, was sitting on my home desk in a manila envelope. $4.3 million. The house, the business valuation, the investment portfolio, 2 IRAs, and a commercial property in Westerville that I had purchased on a quiet afternoon 6 years ago, and that Carol kept telling me I should sell, and that I kept not selling, for reasons I couldn't entirely articulate. I looked at those numbers for a long time. Not with pride, exactly. With a kind of sober recognition. This was what 30 years of 6-day work weeks and never once taking a vacation longer than 5 days looked like. This was what Vanessa had decided was negligible. Now, the proof. I want to tell you about Daniel's college roommate, a man named Greg Palumbo, who had been one of Daniel's groomsmen and whose wife, Carla, I had sat near at the reception. Carla Palumbo was a direct, unpretentious woman who taught middle school English and had the quality, rare and valuable, of saying what she actually thought. She had found me at the reception and apologized, quietly, for the seating arrangement, saying she had heard about the change and thought it was unnecessary. I had thanked her and let the subject drop. But on the Thursday after my meetings with Philip and Carol, Carla called me. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "I'm calling because Greg and I talked about it and I don't feel right saying nothing." She told me this. At the rehearsal dinner the previous Friday, which I had not attended as I had not been invited, Vanessa had made a point, during a quiet moment with the core wedding party, of saying that Daniel's mother has a small cleaning business. She's lovely, but a bit rough around the edges, and we should probably manage expectations about her at the reception. According to Carla, Vanessa had specifically arranged the seating change from the family table, and had done so 2 days before the wedding, without telling Daniel, citing aesthetic flow. Greg had been present. He had said nothing. Carla had found out afterward and had been troubled since. "I don't know if this is useful to you," Carla said. "I just thought you should know it wasn't an accident." I thanked her. I asked carefully if she would be willing to put what she had told me in writing. Not for any lawsuit, I explained, but for my own records. Carla said she would. She emailed me that evening. 3 paragraphs. Clear, specific, dated. I printed it and put it in the same file as my estate documents. Was it a legal weapon? Not precisely. But it was something more important. It was confirmation that I had not misread the situation. This had not been a moment of thoughtless rudeness. This had been a deliberate calculation by a woman who had looked at me, determined my worth, and made arrangements accordingly. It had been planned. It had been coordinated. And my son, whether he knew it or not, was living inside a version of his own mother that his wife had constructed and curated like a piece of furniture she wished weren't in the room. That night, I made a list, not of what I would take away, but of what I would reveal. And the first item on the list was also the most important one. It was time for the Ashford estate to know that Margaret Holloway was reviewing her account. I emailed Sandra, the coordinator, and asked, with the utmost politeness, whether the contract for the September reception might be transferred to the couple's names going forward, as they have expressed a wish to take full ownership of the event records. I explained that this was a bookkeeping matter on my end and that I would need, in any case, an updated letter of record confirming the original payment in my name. Sandra replied within the hour, "Of course, I'll send the original payment confirmation and our standard form for any account modifications." The confirmation arrived the following morning. It was 1 page. It showed my name at the top, the amount, $80,247.60, with the terrace extension, and the date of payment. I held that page and thought about Vanessa's face when she had said, "You understand." Yes, I thought, I understand very well. The execution of a plan, I have always found, feels nothing like the planning of it. Planning is clean and quiet. It lives on yellow legal pads and in phone calls made from parking garages. Execution is when you feel the weight of what you are actually doing. What I actually did was this. Philip Garrett drafted a revised will and estate document over the following 2 weeks. The revisions were not punitive, not yet. They were precautionary. The primary change was the establishment of a formal discretionary trust, into which approximately 60% of my total estate was now directed. The trust had conditions. Distributions required the approval of a trustee. Carol Estbridge agreed to serve. Based on a written set of guidelines I provided. The guidelines were broad, but included a clause pertaining to what I had described in dry legal language as demonstrated respect for the interests and well-being of the settlor. Philip had drafted similar language before. He said it was sound. I signed the documents on a Tuesday morning. I felt signing them a quiet and specific relief. The relief of having put something real between myself and the feeling of helplessness I had carried home from the Ashford estate. I also did one other thing, which was smaller but felt, in some ways, more deliberate. I called Daniel. It was a Sunday, his usual call day, and I let him go through the normal rhythms first. How was I? How was my knee? Had I watched the game? Then I said, casually, that I had been doing some financial housekeeping and had updated some paperwork, and that if he ever had questions about any of it, he was welcome to have a conversation with Philip Garrett, whose contact information I would text him. I said this in the same tone I might use to mention I had finally called the plumber about the bathroom faucet. Daniel said, "Oh, okay, sure, Mom." He did not call Philip Garrett, but Vanessa did. This I learned from Philip, who called me the following Thursday, with the particular measured neutrality of a man who has something notable to report. He told me that a woman identifying herself as Daniel Holloway's wife had called his office and asked to speak with him regarding Margaret Holloway's estate planning. Philip had told her politely that he could not discuss any client's affairs with a third party, and that if her husband wished to be in contact, he was welcome to call himself. She had then asked, Philip said, whether a significant change had recently been made to my will. Philip had again declined to comment and ended the call. So, there it was. Vanessa had been watching for exactly this, which meant she had always understood on some level that there was something to watch for. You do not call your mother-in-law's estate attorney within a week of a casual Sunday phone call, unless you have been tracking the situation with care. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon, 11 days after I had signed the documents. They arrived together, which I had not expected. Daniel and Vanessa in Vanessa's car, pulling into my driveway at 2 o'clock without having called ahead. I saw them from the kitchen window. I put the kettle on. Daniel was uncomfortable from the moment he walked in. He had the look of a man who had been talked into something and had not yet decided whether he agreed with it. Vanessa was entirely composed, same calibrating manner I had always known, but focused now, the way a camera focuses just before it takes a picture. We sat in my living room. I poured tea. I waited. Vanessa spoke first. She told me in a voice of careful reasonableness that they had heard I had been making changes to my financial arrangements, and that as family, they felt they deserved to be part of that conversation. She said that Daniel was naturally concerned. She said that changes of this nature could have significant implications for their planning as a couple, their mortgage, their longer-term security. She used the word family 4 times in the first 3 minutes. Was it a threat? Not technically. It was something more sophisticated than a threat. It was a claim that my money was already, in some implicit way, part of their future, and that my choosing to adjust it constituted a kind of aggression. I looked at Daniel. He looked at the floor, then at me, then at his tea. Is this what you feel? I asked him. Or is this what you've been told to feel? He opened his mouth. Vanessa spoke first. We're not here to argue, she said. We're here because we care about you and we want to understand what's happening. You've been acting strangely since the wedding and… I've been making phone calls and signing documents, I said. That's not strange. That's responsible. You changed your will without telling us. It's my will, I said. I'm not required to tell you anything. The room was quiet for a moment. Through the window, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. Then Vanessa said, and I want to be precise here, because these were her exact words. Margaret, you should understand that if you make choices that damage this family's financial stability, that will have consequences for your relationship with Daniel. He loves you, but everyone has a limit. I looked at her steadily. Are you telling me that my son's love is contingent on my estate planning decisions? She did not answer that. She held my gaze and said nothing. Daniel said quietly, Mom, she doesn't mean… Let me be very clear, I said. I have updated my legal documents, as is my right. I have done so because I have chosen to be thoughtful about my assets and their future. If either of you has questions, you are welcome to speak with Philip Garrett, who will tell you nothing because attorney-client privilege applies. If there is something else you'd like to discuss, something personal, I am always here for that conversation. But I will not be pressured about my own finances in my own living room. Vanessa stood up. Her face was perfectly controlled, which meant, I had learned, that she was furious. We'll talk later, she said, when you're in a better place. They left. I sat in the quiet living room and listened to the car back out of the driveway. Then I got up, washed the tea things, put on my coat, and drove to the Columbus Botanical Garden, which I had not visited in 2 years. I walked for an hour among the late autumn plantings and spoke to no one and thought of nothing in particular. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days of normal things. Work, evening walks, one very long phone call with an old friend in Cincinnati who knew nothing of any of this and talked cheerfully about her grandchildren for 40 minutes. 3 days of deliberately not thinking about Vanessa's face when she stood up from my couch. And then I went back to work. The invitation arrived by text, which told me something immediately. A genuine gesture of reconciliation between adults who had sat in a living room together and said difficult things would have been a phone call. A text was something you could screenshot. A text was evidence of effort without requiring the vulnerability of a voice. Hi, Margaret. This is Vanessa. I've been thinking about our last conversation and I want to apologize if things got heated. I'd love to take you to lunch sometime this week. Just the two of us. I think we got off on the wrong foot and I'd like to try again. Let me know what works for you. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on my desk and finished reviewing the quarterly payroll summary I had been working on. The word if was doing a great deal of work in that message. If things got heated. Not, I said something I shouldn't have. Not, I made you feel unwelcome at your son's wedding. If. Conditional. Distributing the responsibility equally. Dissolving the specifics into atmosphere. I had been managing people for 30 years. I recognized the architecture of a non-apology. I also recognized the architecture of reconnaissance, because that was what this was. Vanessa did not know precisely what I had done, what I was planning, how far along I was, or who I had spoken to. A lunch would give her a chance to find out. I texted back, "Thank you, Vanessa. I'm quite busy this week, but I'll be in touch." She replied with a heart emoji. I found that detail almost interesting. It was around this time that I understood something about myself. I was not afraid. Or rather, I was not afraid in the way I might have expected to be. I was 63 years old, and I was engaged in a quiet, careful conflict with my daughter-in-law. and my son was somewhere in the middle of it. And by any ordinary measure, this should have been devastating. But I had built a business in a field where no one expected a widowed woman in her early 40s to succeed. I had negotiated contracts with hospital administrators who had looked at me the way Vanessa looked at my kitchen. I had fired people, hired people, weathered an audit, and survived a period 2 years ago when a key contract was abruptly canceled and I had to restructure my entire operation in 6 weeks. I knew how to hold steady, but I also knew, and this is something I believe in deeply, that no one holds steady entirely alone. I called Carla Palumbo on a Wednesday evening. Carla was the kind of woman I had not had enough of in my life. Direct, kind, and without the particular social anxiety that makes people hedge everything they say until the meaning dissolves. She had already done something brave in calling me and sending that email. I wanted her to know I was grateful. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. She told me more about Vanessa, things she had observed over the time Daniel and Vanessa had been together, the way Vanessa categorized people efficiently and without revision, the way she managed Daniel's social world gradually but systematically, the friends she welcomed, and the ones she found reasons to discourage. Carla said Greg had pulled back from Daniel over the past year because Daniel had stopped initiating contact, and when Greg reached out, Vanessa was usually present and the conversations never went anywhere. "I don't think Daniel is a bad person," Carla said. "I think he's a person who really loves someone, and that person has very slowly rearranged everything around him." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Carol Espridge, for her part, became an unexpected source of something I can only call steady companionship. She had known me for 19 years. She knew the shape of my life, even when she didn't know the details. When I met with her the following Friday to review the trust documentation, one final time before we filed it, she looked at me over the edge of her reading glasses and said, "Margaret, whatever this is, you're handling it correctly." I asked how she could know that without knowing the details. "Because you're filing documents," she said, "instead of crying into a casserole dish." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in what felt like several weeks. There was one more thread of support I found, in a slightly different form. One of my longest-standing business contacts was a woman named Diane Fulworth, who had retired 2 years ago from managing supplier relations for one of the hospital networks I contracted with. Diane was 71, sharp, and had navigated her own complicated family situation some years back that she had never detailed to me, but had referenced occasionally. I called her on a Thursday afternoon, ostensibly to catch up, and found myself telling her more than I had intended. Diane listened. Then she said, "You know what the most dangerous thing you can do to a person like that is?" I said I didn't. "Stop being predictable," she said. "They've built their whole strategy around what they think you'll do. Stop being what they expect." I thought about that all the way home. Stop being predictable. It was, in its way, the purest distillation of everything I was already doing. Vanessa had expected a woman in a navy dress who would be quietly hurt and do nothing. She had not expected phone calls to estate attorneys, itemized billing reviews, formal trust documents. She had not expected me to sit across from her in my own living room with a steady voice and say, "It's my will." I ate dinner alone that night, roast chicken, a glass of white wine, and felt, for the first time since the wedding, something close to calm. Not happiness, not yet, but the particular calm of a person who knows what she is doing and why. There was still a distance to travel, but I had good company for it. They came on a Sunday evening, which they knew was usually quiet for me. Dinner hour, the soft light of late November, the kind of timing that says, "We came in peace," Daniel had called that afternoon. His voice was different from the week before. Softer, more like himself. The warm Sunday call voice I had known for 30 years. He said he missed me. He said he knew things had been tense, and he didn't want that. He asked if they could come by. I said yes, because Daniel had asked, and because I want to be honest about this. There was a part of me that was not entirely made of strategy. There was a mother in there, underneath all of it, who had driven that boy to soccer practice and held him while he cried at his father's funeral and had never once, in all the years since, stopped loving him. I said yes because I always said yes to Daniel. I hoped, with the small, irrational hope that mothers carry, that something real was coming. They arrived at 6. Vanessa was carrying flowers. A grocery store bouquet, yellow and white. The kind you choose when you want to communicate the gesture without investing too much in the gesture. I thanked her and put them in water and set them on the kitchen counter and did not read anything into them out loud. We sat in the living room again. Same couch, same tea, same late autumn dark pressing against the windows. For the first 20 minutes, it was almost normal. Daniel talked about work, a wetlands assessment he was doing for a county parks project. Vanessa asked about my knee. I showed her the new prescription anti-inflammatory the doctor had recommended, and she said she had heard good things about it. Then the terrain shifted. It was Daniel who made the first move, which surprised me. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with the earnest, slightly pained expression I recognized from his teenage years. The look he had when he had rehearsed something and was now delivering it. "Mom," he said, "I need you to understand that Vanessa and I are a team, and when something affects her, it affects me. And when I feel like you're pulling away or making decisions that feel like you're angry at us, that affects me. That hurts me." "What decisions have hurt you?" I asked. "The will," he said. "The changes you made, the way you've been distant. We don't know what we did wrong." Vanessa, sitting beside him, said nothing. She was watching me with a quality of attention that was almost professional. "You know what you did wrong," I said. "Margaret," Vanessa said, and her voice was different now. Quieter, more careful. The voice of a person who has decided to try something else. "I want to apologize for the wedding. I was under enormous stress, and I handled things badly. You deserved better than that, and I know it." She paused. "But I'm asking you to think about what you're doing to Daniel, to your relationship with him. You're using your estate as a weapon, and—" "I'm not using anything as a weapon," I said. "I updated legal documents, that's all. You're changing who inherits your money because you're angry with me. I'm changing my estate plan because it reflects my current values and intentions, which is what estate plans are for." "You're going to destroy this marriage," she said. Something in her voice had shifted again. The careful quality had thinned, and underneath it was the first hint of something raw. Not genuine emotion, I thought. Genuine frustration. The frustration of a plan that was not working. I looked at her. Then I looked at Daniel. He was still watching the floor. "Daniel," I said, "look at me." He looked up. "Do you love me?" "Of course I do," he said, immediate, unhesitating. That, at least, I believed. "Then nothing I'm doing threatens that," I said. "My estate documents have nothing to do with how much I love you. I love you entirely. I have always loved you entirely. But I will not be told how to manage my own finances, and I will not pretend that what happened at your wedding didn't happen. Not for the sake of keeping the peace. Not even for you." Vanessa stood up. "We tried," she said. "We came here in good faith. You've made it clear that you're not interested in repairing this relationship." "I'm interested in honesty," I said. "If that's the same thing, then yes." She walked to the door. Daniel stood, slowly, with the look of a man who was being carried by a current he could not name. He paused at the doorway. "Mom," he said. "I love you," I told him. "That doesn't change. It will never change." He nodded. Then he followed his wife out the door. I sat in the quiet room for a very long time. I would be lying if I said I felt nothing. There was something cold and specific in my chest. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition that this might get worse before it got better. That Vanessa would not sit down gracefully. That the next move, whatever it was, would be harder than anything so far. But alongside the cold thing was something else. The conversation had confirmed what I needed to know. Vanessa's concern was not about Daniel's relationship with his mother. It was about the estate documents. It had always been about that, from the very first phone call to Philip's office. And that clarification, clean and precise as a line drawn on a map, told me exactly where I was and where I needed to go. I picked up the legal pad from the coffee table and turned to a fresh page. 2 more steps, I wrote, and then it's done. Christmas came early that year, at least in the sense that the invitation did. Daniel called me in the first week of December. The Sunday call, same warm voice, no trace of the living room confrontation in his tone, and said he and Vanessa were hosting a small dinner on the 21st. Just family and a few close friends. He said they wanted to put everything behind them. He said it would mean a great deal to him if I came. I said I would be there. I want to be careful telling this part. I am aware that what I did could seem calculated. It was. But calculation and cruelty are different things. I did not go to that dinner to humiliate anyone. I went because it was the last remaining opportunity to make the truth visible. Not to me, I already knew the truth, but to the people around us who had been seeing only what Vanessa chose to show them. I spent 2 evenings before the dinner organizing a simple folder. Not a dossier, not a presentation. A folder. In it, the Ashford Estate payment confirmation, $80,247.60, my name at the top. A copy of Carla Palumbo's written account of the rehearsal dinner conversation, and a brief factual note I had written, 2 paragraphs, describing in sequence what had occurred at the reception. The seating, the approach to the head table, the words that had been said. Philip had confirmed there was nothing legally problematic about sharing it. I also made 1 phone call the evening before the dinner. I called Greg Palumbo and asked if he and Carla were free on the 21st. He said yes, as it happened. I explained briefly why it might be useful if they were present. Greg was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We'll be there." The dinner was in Daniel and Vanessa's apartment, a large, cleanly furnished place in a newer building, the kind that has been arranged to look effortless and takes considerable effort to maintain. Vanessa had set a beautiful table. There were 8 guests in addition to herself and Daniel, Daniel's best man and his wife, 2 couples from Vanessa's professional circle, Vanessa's mother, and, somewhat to Vanessa's visible surprise, Greg and Carla Palumbo, who arrived at 7:15 and greeted me warmly in the entryway. I had dressed simply, charcoal blazer, dark trousers, the pearl earrings. I brought wine. I sat where I was shown. It was a pleasant dinner for the first 90 minutes. Good food, careful conversation, the specific social warmth of a gathering trying very hard. Vanessa was an excellent hostess, charming, attentive, funny in a dry way. She was, I will give her this, extremely good at this part. Then Vanessa's mother, seated near me, said, "Daniel tells me you have a cleaning business, Margaret. How practical. It must be a comfort to keep busy." It was not malicious. She was simply reflecting what she had been told. But I saw Vanessa, at the far end of the table, settle back slightly in her chair. The small relaxation of someone who feels they are on safe ground. "It's become a substantial business, actually," I said pleasantly. "About 40 employees, contracts with several hospital systems, reasonably significant revenue. Daniel has always been modest about these things on my behalf. I don't mind." I smiled. I also wanted to mention something, since Daniel has said he'd like a fresh start. I reached into my bag and removed the folder. This is something I've been carrying for a few weeks, and I think it's better shared than held. I set the folder on the table. The reception venue for the September wedding, the Ashford Estate, was paid for entirely by me. $80,000 in my name. I said this quietly, looking at no one in particular. I made that payment willingly, as a gift to my son. I also want everyone here to know that at the reception, I was asked not to approach the family table and told I was creating a visual. That request was made by Vanessa. And according to written accounts from 2 people present at the rehearsal dinner the night before, it was a deliberate arrangement, not an impulsive moment, Carla said from across the table. I was one of those people. I put it in writing. The room was very quiet. Vanessa's face, for just a moment, was exposed. The composure was still there, but underneath it was something fragile. The visible effort required to maintain the surface she always showed. She looked at me, then at Carla, then at her mother. "This is completely out of proportion," she said. Her voice was steady, but too fast. "Margaret, this is a private family matter, and you are airing it in front of our guests. The kind of behavior that creates a visual," I said. Someone made a short sound, not quite a laugh. "I didn't ask you not to sit at the table," Vanessa said. "I asked you to wait. You said I was out of place. You referenced how I looked. Those are your words, not mine." I was stressed. 2 days earlier, I said, you told the wedding party that Daniel's mother was rough around the edges and arranged the seating change without telling him. I looked at Daniel directly. "Did you know about the seating change?" He looked genuinely lost. I thought, Vanessa said it was a logistics thing. "There was no logistics issue," Carla said quietly. "She asked us not to mention it to you." Daniel turned to Vanessa. Something in his face was working very hard. "I was trying to manage the image of the evening," Vanessa said. "Daniel, your mother's appearance." "My appearance?" I said. "Yes. I was trying to protect." "You told me the seating was logistics," Daniel said. Very quiet. "You told me my mother preferred to sit with the friends group." "Daniel, you told me that," he said. She reached for his arm. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Vanessa had nothing ready to say. For the first time in my experience of her, the mechanism had stopped. I closed my folder and returned it to my bag. "I didn't come here to cause pain," I said. "I came because Daniel asked me to, and because the truth was going to be in this room one way or another." I looked at my son. "I love you. I have loved you every day of your life. That has never been and will never be conditional." I stood up, thanked Vanessa for the dinner, wished everyone a good evening, and put on my coat. No one spoke as I walked to the door. The call came 4 days later. Daniel called on a Thursday morning, not his Sunday, and that alone told me something had changed. I set down my papers and answered. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had decided weeks before that I would not make this easy or quick, not out of cruelty, because an apology accepted in 10 seconds costs nothing." "Tell me what you're sorry for," I said. It took him almost 20 minutes. He was sorry for the seating, sorry for not asking questions when things at the wedding hadn't felt right, sorry for the living room visit, sorry for years of not asking more carefully how I was. And then he said he had found my number in Vanessa's blocked contacts list 2 days after the dinner, while she was out. "She told me it was an accident," he said. "But it wasn't, was it?" It wasn't a question. "I suspected something like that," I said. The following weeks were quiet, but heavy, with things being decided. Carol told me Vanessa's attorney had inquired about the discretionary trust. Philip confirmed it was fully executed and uncontestable. There was nothing to contest. My estate was my own. A week after New Year's, Daniel came to my house alone and told me quietly that he and Vanessa were separating. He said the dinner had been a correction of his vision, of his understanding of the past several years. He'd been having conversations he should have had long ago. I made coffee. I listened. I did not say, "I told you so." Vanessa retained an attorney and attempted to claim the Ashford estate payment, created a financial obligation on my part. Philip's response was 3 paragraphs. A gift is a gift. The claim dissolved. She moved back to her parents' home. The social network she had built around the marriage had to be rebuilt on different terms. I did not follow it. I didn't need to. I called Daniel and told him my house was his house, and there would always be a key under the ceramic pot by the back door. "Are you angry at me?" he asked. "I was frightened for you," I said. "That's different." A silence. Then, "Thank you for not giving up on me. You're my son," I said. "That's not something I know how to do." By the following autumn, I had joined a Tuesday evening walking group. I mention this because it seems small, and it was, but it was the first new thing I had added to my life in years that had nothing to do with business, strategy, or management. 7 women, 6 o'clock, the Scioto River Trail, an hour of walking and talking about whatever we wanted. I went the first time out of politeness. I went every week after that out of something that felt, slowly and improbably, like pleasure. Holloway Facility Solutions completed a significant contract renewal in February on better terms than the previous cycle. I brought on an operations manager named Teresa, whose talent I had been quietly observing for 2 years. Her arrival freed me, for the first time, to take a real vacation. I went to Oregon in June. 10 days, small hotels, good food, fog coming off the Pacific. The first genuine vacation I had taken since Richard died. Parked on a headland above the ocean with bad gas station coffee, I thought, this is what I was protecting, not the money. The right to still become someone. Daniel came for Thanksgiving, alone. There was a small grief in that, for what I had hoped his marriage might have been. But the meal was good, the conversation was real, and at some point we watched an old movie we had seen together when he was 12 and laughed at the same parts. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see clearly," he said. "You were in love," I told him. "People in love are supposed to be partially blind. That's what love is for. You came clear eventually. That's enough." It was enough. I want you to know that it actually was. As for Vanessa, I did not follow her life with attention, and I did not wish her harm. But Carla mentioned in early spring that the social circle Vanessa had cultivated through the marriage had quietly redistributed itself. Dinner invitations had thinned. This is the unglamorous truth about social capital. It doesn't disappear dramatically. It simply fails to compound. In November, the day before Thanksgiving, Teresa stopped in my office doorway and asked if I was doing anything fun that weekend. I thought about Daniel coming tomorrow, the walking group on Tuesday, Oregon in June, and wherever I might go next year. "Yes," I said, "I think I am."